So, good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Jay Meszar. I'm a solutions consultant here at IMAGINiT Technologies, and I want to go through some of the Leica RTC 360 firmware updates, as well as some of the Register 360 updates. Now, when I say updates, I just want to be clear that these are updates that have happened over the past 6 to 9 months or so, and we'll be covering most of the updates from version 1.6. There were not a lot of updates from 1.6.1. So just with that kind of clarification, we'll get started. And let's talk about some of what I'm going to talk about. And these are firmware updates for 2.0.73. There was several firmware updates that I think are rather important to talk about. So we'll dig into those a little bit. I'll list them out for you, and hopefully if there are any questions at the end, we'll get those answered for you. I'm also going to talk about Register 360. There were just some great feature updates in Register 360, both for the RTC and for the BLK, and I will dig in a little bit of the BLK stuff, but not too much. We'll talk about some of the updates in Cyclone Field, and if I have time, I'll dig into the ones in Cyclone itself, but probably we'll have to table that for another time, right? So as we look at some of the updates, and I'm just listing them out here, and we'll go through in a little more detail as we go on. But one of the big things that, in my opinion anyway, that I think Leica did with the firmware was they adjusted the data size of the raw data. So I know many people have told me that they were using different scanners, and one of the things they didn't like about the RTC when it came out was that their scanner, whatever they were using, had smaller data sizes. And, you know, initially it's kind of like, well, yes, but we're also collecting 2 million points per second. But obviously Leica heard some of those same concerns, and they went ahead and adjusted the data size. And we'll take a look at some comparisons of data collected before the firmware update as opposed to data collected after the firmware update. And I think you'll be rather surprised and hopefully rather excited about some of this stuff if you haven't already noticed it, right? They also went ahead and added some compression to the data image size, and in doing so, also found a way to improve the image quality. So I would love to be a fly on the wall in that programming section of Leica where they said, hey, we're going to make the images better, but we're also going to make them smaller somehow. That would have been an interesting conversation, I think. They updated Viz so it works a little bit better in dark environments. So for those of you who do a lot of dark scanning, that would be an enhancement. They have pin code protection now on the scanner itself. So should you be scanning in an area where there are a lot of people walking by and somebody should decide they're going to go up and kind of mess with your scanner, you can put a pin code in. And we'll show you kind of what that screen looks like a little bit, at least best I can here on a WebEx. We'll show you what that screen looks like and kind of what error messages pop up with the wrong pin code, right? Monitoring tilt change. The RTC 360 now will take a look at any of the tilt change. So if you are scanning in an environment where there's a lot of vibration, the scanner will let you know that, hey, this is what's going on. The scanner is moving. And again, we'll take a look at that in a little bit more detail. And just one of my complaints to this prior to this firmware was Wi-Fi performance and losing connection to the scanner, and I think they've done a pretty good job of enhancing that as well. So all kind of things in the firmware, and the first thing I mentioned we were going to look at was point cloud data size, right? So if we're scanning and we've got 20 scans or 40 scans, and we've got this scanner set on high, we can really be collecting a lot of data. And for those of you who have been scanning a while, or maybe those of you that are even brand new to it, I'm sure one of your company's IT complaints is, wow, we are really blowing through some hard drives here, and we're concerned about how much data we are storing. Now, we have to remember that, again, we are collecting millions, in some cases billions worth of points. So we have to remember that. But I think, again, Leica did a pretty fantastic job in checking out the firmware. So the file size has been decreased by greater than 3 times what it originally was on the RTC 360. So you can see here in this graphic the low, medium, and high resolutions. And from firmware version 1 to firmware version 2, we're getting a factor of greater than 3 times smaller. So when I looked at this graphic, I said, great, I'm pretty trustworthy. I'll take Leica at their word. But I figured maybe there would be some skeptics out there, and I wanted to go and check some of the data that I collected prior to the firmware update, and then some of the data that I collected after the firmware update. Now, full disclosure here, these are not the same data sets. They are 2 different data sets that I found that were close in the amount of scans that they had. And you'll actually see here, as I click, our real data comparison before the upgrade, right? We're able to come in here, and if we take a look right in this area here, we've got 4,000 files and 20 folders at 74.1 gigabytes. So, okay, again, I'm collecting millions, if not billions of points, so I'm okay with that, right? Well, we're going to go ahead and take a look now at after the upgrade. So after the upgrade, I now have 4,120 files in 20 folders, and I'm at 22.2 gigabytes. So again, we're still at a factor of 3 and change. So I was actually, to be honest, a little surprised by this, because I thought, sometimes when we see graphics from companies that, maybe they take their best case scenario. And I can tell you that this was a totally random selection of different project scans that I picked just because they were close in the amount of files and folders that I had. Okay? So I'm going to continue on here, and let's talk about the image compression. Okay? We're now able to turn on image compression. Okay? And that's going to reduce the size of our images by 1.5 times. And you can see again the graphic there. And on the left, we're looking at the actual settings window of the RTC 360. Now, if this is a feature that interests all of you, I want you all to know that this is one of the changes from version from the previous version of the firmware to the latest version of the firmware. Okay, and that is that image compression was added, and then the newest and latest, it's automatically turned on as you turn on the scanner. Okay, so you can disable it if you want to by going into settings. oops, my mouse doesn't want to cooperate. There we go. All right. So in this image here, we're looking at the quality of the imagery. And again, this is before the firmware upgrade. And, you know, again, I look at this and I think, okay, well, I don't really have too much of a problem with this. It doesn't seem too bad. But when you start to look at it in detail, and we look along along the tops and the edges of the picture, we can see it gets a little pixelated. When we see the beer garden here, you see it gets a little bit pixelated there. And again, I don't think that that's necessarily terrible, but, you know, it is a little bit pixelated if we're being picky. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to come down and show you an after the firmware upgrade. And again, this is not the same data set, but what I want you to look at is the edges of the buildings. If we take a look at these edges, you'll see that it's not as pixelated. Okay? And even in here on these beams, we don't see the edges of these beams. If I go back and we look at just this light pole here, we can see, again, a little bit pixelated. We'll go forward. And I'm not seeing that same thing happen here. Okay? So these are all things that I just wanted to point out to you, and hopefully they're the features that, again, you're excited about as I am, and will it'll make your projects a little bit better. Okay, so I mentioned the tilt change. So now in the firmware, the RTC is going to monitor if it has changed its position at all while it's scanning. Okay, so under our letter A there, the tilt change was added to assist in working in high vibration environments. Now, I can tell you from experience that I've scanned a couple of different places where the floor was vibrating pretty good. Right? I'm on maybe a metal catwalk where things are shaking the floor underneath, and I got to be honest, initially I was concerned about how the RTC was going to handle something like this and what kind of data I was going to get out of it. And I really have gotten excellent data out of the RTC with this. I was afraid I was going to need to bring in the big guns with the P series and need to use the dual axis compensator, but that wasn't the case. The RTC did a great job. If you deactivate the tilt change, you just won't get any messages about it at all, right? And the latest firmware update it has this enabled by default. All right, so let's look at the PIN code on the scanner. So again, this is for security reasons. The PIN code was added, and I don't know. I've never had a need for it, but I assume that maybe there are folks scanning in some areas where they might need it. But it just adds a 6-digit code where we can come up, and this is what you'll see on the left-hand side. You'll see the 6-digit option to punch in here. And if you keep putting in the wrong PIN code, you're going to get a message that says, contact technical support for unlocking key. Okay. All right. So now we begin some of the software updates. And I can tell you, I'm going to tell you that there are 3, if not 4 slides of just software updates and improvements to Register 360. Okay? So as I come through here and start talking about these, I'm not going to dive into each one in detail. I'm not going to demo each one, but I'm going to try and pick some of the ones that I believe are the kind of best and most efficient ones for you guys to be using. So in Register 360, we've got support for the BLK data capture with Cyclone Field 360. Okay, so if you've been using your BLK and maybe you've used Recap in the past because that was what allowed you to use the iPad, right? We now can use the iPad with Cyclone Field 360, connect to the scanner, and we can use Cyclone Field to collect all of our data. Okay, so that gives us some features like being able to look at our scans in the field and use more of a Register 360 workflow to assist in the registration in the field, and allows us to add other items like geotags and items like that. So this was a welcome feature as far as I'm concerned, because I really like the workflow for the RTC, and trying to jump back and forth between the RTC and the BLK and switching softwares to do so, I find a bit cumbersome. So now if we are able to use the BLK with Cyclone Field, it just makes it easier for my simple mind, I suppose. All right. We can import individual RTC 360 job folders, and I'm going to show this one here in a little bit, because if you don't know about this yet, I think you're going to find it really helpful when you import your RTC 360 jobs. Okay. New support for 5120 RTC 360 images. Right, and just again, making the image quality a little bit better. I'm not much to demonstrate there. I can show you, but not much to demonstrate there. Battery naming of setups. I will show this one in Register 360. So if you were out in the field and scanning with Cyclone Field, and you simply just have kept on hitting scan, 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 and gotten through your whole project and realized, whoa, I forgot I wanted to separate the inside from the outside, or the first floor from the second floor. We can do a batch renaming of setups right inside Register 360. It's pretty great. Okay. And number 6 there, I was so happy to see this one, because one of my kind of pet peeves, if you will, with Register 360 when it came out was simply that if I had a project and I decided, hey, I'm going to rebuild my machine, and I forgot to move a project, I was kind of out of luck before I took Register 360 away. So I'll show you how you can reconnect to a project storage folder. All right? Excuse me. And number 7 there, tilt fix for a bad Z direction in visual alignment. So let's say you set your scanner on a 60-degree angle for some reason, and even though the RTC does a pretty good job of leveling the scans out on its own, hey, look, technology is technology, and sometimes you get kind of a crooked scan. And if you can't get them to go together by laying them over horizontally and vertically, then your scan is not going to be worth anything. So we can fix that bad Z direction right inside Register 360. And again, this is one of the ones I'd like to show here in a little bit. All right. Limit boxes. Great feature. I think maybe this was taken from some recommendations, at least I hope, that people liked about Recap, and they added it here into Register 360. And again, we'll show, I'm going to at least show most of this first page here, so hopefully you guys will get to see all of that. Stick around. Our Detect Moving Objects filter, simply helping in the cleanup of our point cloud. I know from myself being on site at times, You simply can't control whether there's a forklift moving through your scene, or there's cars in an intersection. You know, we can't unfortunately just tell everybody to stop while we finish scanning. So those moving objects that are just going through as we're scanning can be detected and then easily removed using Register 360. Okay. For those of you out there that are still using targets and prefer to use targets for a variety of reasons, no problem with that. Leica's added the sphere target extraction, so we're now able to use both the older sphere targets from Leica, or if you also have let's say a Faro scanner and you're using the sphere targets from there, we can extract those targets in Register 360. Okay. And then one of the last ones here is support for the RCP format. And no, we don't, you know, our plan isn't to, or at least my plan isn't to try to meld recap into Register 360, but merely assist you in providing clients with maybe their wanted deliverable. So we can be able to use Leica software through our whole project. And at the end of the day, our client wants to see an RCP because they've got that with one of their industry collections. No problem. We can export out the RCP or RCS format and provide that to them so they can look at it and recap. Okay. All right. A couple of other things here. Support for password-protected LGS files and Jetstream projects, simply allowing you to place a password on those types of projects so that you know, the wrong people, they don't get into the wrong hands, the wrong people open them. I'm just going to add here, I'll show where this is, but I just want to, before I forget, remember to tell you that if you do indeed add a passport to your LGS and Jetstream projects, it's my understanding that there is not a way to recover that password if you forget it. So keep track of your passwords, folks. That would be a bad thing to go through all the work to provide somebody their LGS or Jetstream project and then have to publish a different one just so you can get by a forgotten password. Right? We're able now to export and re-import panoramic images. I'll show that. It's kind of self-explanatory, but I'll show the workflow a little bit. Granular publishing options for Jetstream. We'll look at the Publish tab, and I'll show you some of those options. New setup naming convention for the RTC 360 data. We can look at that in Cyclone Field. And report viewing enhancement. We look at some of the reporting. So what I'm going to do now, because I do have a list of probably 10 other items that we could talk about, but I want to get through and get some of these top 15 or 16 in there and show you demo style about these features, so we don't kind of just sit here looking at a PowerPoint. So if I can, I'm just going to hit escape, and we're going to jump right in to Register 360. Okay, so earlier I mentioned that there was support for the BLK 360 data capture with Cyclone Field. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop over to my import tab here and wait for my machine to catch up, I guess. Okay, and you'll notice now that there are a couple of new buttons here. We've got, well, we had the BLK for a little while, but there's now the Field 360, and we got a tablet-looking icon here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the workflow of going from the iPad over into Register 360. Now, I'm going to ask for your patience here, and I'm going to ask Katana to please switch the sharing so that it now goes to that other user of mine? Awesome. Thank you very much. I don't want that one. I want this one. All right. So let's just give this a moment. And Katana, can you just tell me if you can see the iPad?
No, it says that you're starting to share content, but I don't see the images.
Okay, well. There we go. All right. So obviously we're looking at my iPad here, and it's going to be a little bit laggy here. I apologize for that up front. But when in the iPad, we can actually come in and in our Field 360 app, we can come over and we can tell it to sync server there in the top corner. And when I hit sync server, you're going to see that it gives me a IP address there. And I have this connected to the same network as my PC is connected. And so what I want to do is kind of take a mental note of that IP address. And Katana, if you could go ahead and flip me back to the other user.
There you go.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. Okay, so when we're in here, then I can hit Field 360, test my connection, and you can see now I'm successfully connected because I've got the IP address, and I can say add to project. It's now reading my iPad and taking the data from the iPad here into Register 360. Now, for those of you who have been scanning with a BLK and have been taking the data from the iPad over into Recap, and you had to have iTunes installed and all of that sort of thing, you can see here, I don't have, well, I have iTunes installed, but I don't need iTunes installed. I'm able to get my data right across. I would hit import, and that would bring my data in. I'm not going to do that here simply because I don't want, first of all, you all to have to wait for the import, and second of all, we can do other things. And I'm going to unimport that, okay? So I'm going to go and grab a data set here. Go back here. All right. So back in the old days here of Register 360, and not that it's that old, in order to import data, we would come in and grab our project folder, and we would drag and drop it over into import. And when we did that, our project would start to show up here. Now, that's great, but one of the problems with that is if we did several projects and we had them in our USB folder for RTC, well, we got all the project scans, and then we would have to go turn off the ones that we didn't want to use. So the new feature of being able to import individual RTC 360 job folders would simply allow me to grab, drag, and drop this folder over here onto the files, and it will take that folder into Register 360. Okay? Again, I'm not going to import data simply because we don't want to have to wait for that. So once our data then gets imported, if we decided, hey, you know, we wanted to take a couple of these scans and we wanted to rename them, you can simply click on one of the setups, hold down the Shift key, grab the rest of the setups that you'd like to rename, right mouse click, and choose Rename Selected Setups. this is our batch rename tool where I might come in and say these are outside. Okay, and I'll start with one format, it's fine, and I'm going to say okay. And now I've renamed these three setups, 1, 2, and 3. All right. So one of the things that sometimes can be difficult is if you're scanning in an area, and I'm just going to jump in here and go to the setup cloud. You're scanning in an area, and you get something like this, where maybe there's a little too much sunlight. Right? Remember that the RTC 360 takes, and I'm going to turn the cloud off here, takes HDR images, and therefore allows me to adjust the brightness either by choosing auto brightness or turning auto brightness off, and I can pretty much make it almost completely dark in there, or I can make it completely white in there. And I can do all of this just by viewing the image. Now, this is a great tool, but one of the things that it doesn't do is remap that coloring to the point cloud. So whatever I have when I turn the imagery off and I turn the point cloud on, yeah, this is what it is. So instead, I could come in and I could edit the HDR image and go into the tone map editor, and now I can adjust the coloring here. And you can see as we get a little bit darker. And as I get some of that darkness down, and maybe this is what I like, I can say okay to that, and it will remap those colors to the point cloud, if that's what I want it to do, okay? And there are different formats where you can come through Cyclone here, and you can see that you can adjust, and each one will use a different editor to adjust the pictures, okay? So I'm not going to do that here. It'll only take a minute, but we'll just won't wait for it here. So that's another way of adjusting images. And since I'm talking about the images, I'm going to switch back to my sitemap here, and I'm going to come out to this setup cloud. Now, one of the things that I wanted to do here was I wanted to edit imagery for this point cloud or this setup. So what I did was I went ahead and I selected the scan, and I said, export my panoramic images. And then when I said export, it asks me to select a folder. Excuse me. So after I've selected the folder, I hit select folder, and it's going to take and export those images. Now, I'm going to cancel that, and what I can then do with that is I can open those images, and I'll show you a new one here. I'll show you one of the ones I edited. I took this image out, and this is how it just kind of comes out and says that it's a JPG, and I opened it in any image editor. This happens to be my Microsoft Photo Editor. And I wanted to just make a simple change. So I went in and put a Leica Geosystems tag here in the picture. And then I went in and I said, okay, well, if I do that, I want to remap that.
How to help with that, yes.
Sorry about that. I went ahead and put that image back in to the picture itself. So I went back and I said, okay, re-import the panoramic image, and that makes the change here in the software. Okay? So if you wanted to just simply, I don't know, do something like put your company's name, or maybe you are very good with something like Photoshop, and as you were scanning, somebody's face got plastered on the wall and you wanted to take that out. You could do that with any photo editor. I just use Photoshop as an example, but you could do that with any photo editor and then bring that image back in, or you can adjust the lighting and bring that image back in and be able to get rid of somebody's face plastered on a wall. Okay. All right. So again, earlier I mentioned that sometimes we scan and we get scan data that just doesn't go together well because it comes in tilted. And I find this more with data from other scanners and things like that. But I just want to show you what Leica's done to help us combat tilted scans that don't line up well, especially vertically. So I'm going to come into a visual alignment here in Register 360. It's going to take a moment. And I'm going to look at this from the side view, and you can see everything lines up pretty well here. But let's just pretend for a moment that it was tilted. I could come down to the lower corner, and I could select Correct Tilt. And if I hold my left mouse button, I can correct the vertical tilt in this scan. So if it was off for any reason, I could simply fix that and then turn Correct Tilt off, join and optimize again, and I would be on my way. Okay? I know previous scanners and importing the data before a command like this existed was just a pain to get it registered, and sometimes even went as far as to having to go out and rescan, which we really don't want to have to do. Okay? All right. So another one of the tools that I like, and I said earlier that it kind of comes from Recap. I think it does, but one of those things is coming in and looking at the bundle cloud here, and you'll notice that when you look at the bundle, you can come up and there's a big cube here. This allows me to create a limit box. And you'll see that if you come in and you look at your limit box, it's kind of this reddish, pinkish box here, and I can adjust the height of my limit box, and you'll see that my point cloud will start to kind of disappear a little bit, right? I can adjust taking this in, and I can even, I want to now bring this side in, and if any of you have used this feature, you probably find that, boy, it really seems to get a little bit tough to get the side that you want by dragging your mouse around. And there's a little tip for you. If you hold down the Shift key and hover over a side that you'd like to grab, I can then grab that and let go of the Shift key, and I can bring that in. One of the other features here is you'll often find that if you zoom in that your limit box doesn't line up very well with the project that you've scanned, right? You might want walls parallel to walls or something like that. And you can come in and use a combination of the Alt key and the left mouse key to adjust the rotation of the limit box. Okay? And then ultimately, you know, I want to keep this limit box. I want to be able to come back to this later so I can manage my limit boxes and save them. Okay? And then I can drag this to my other screen if I like, and I can turn it off and not use it, or I can simply turn the visibility of it off, but keep it active, and then I can close my limit box manager. So now I'm only seeing the amount of data that I want to see. And at any time, can turn that back on. Can make adjustments and save another one. You can save several of these things if you like, and you can then even export the limit boxes. Okay? So some good features there. Oops, I'm going to go turn this off. And actually, let me bring that in here. I'm going to grab this and slide this in, and we're going to show one of the next features here. And hopefully, I'm getting this where I want it. All right. So as I come in here, if we take a quick look, this was from a presentation we did a while back, and you can see that as we scanned, we had a person or two walking through our scan. And, you know, I know there's somebody here walking through the door, and the door moved. And so, you know, I got to be honest, it's not often that I want to go through my entire point cloud and I want to clean the entire thing. Usually I'm looking for as quick as possible, but there are the kind of rare occasions where I do want to get a point cloud cleaned up. I'd like to remove some of the people. And so when I want to do something like that, you know, now I could use the limit box and highlight a person, or I could just simply come in and find the person, and I could select them and delete. But often, yeah, that kind of made me delete people, delete information behind the person, or, you know, I had to kind of pan up like this. And so, anyway, my point being that this became a little bit of a task just to get rid of some little bit of points here. So Leica added a feature that allows us to go in and say detect moving objects. So when we click on that, and I've already done it just to save time during this call because I want you guys to be able to ask questions. When we do that, it runs through a process, and it probably took, I'm going to say 3 or 4 minutes for this to run. And when it did, it then highlights what it believes to be moving objects through the environment, right? So I'm going to go ahead and say show moving objects, and you're going to see my whole point cloud turn black and white except for some of these red points, which were indeed moving objects. You can see the people walking through the scene. The doors moved because people walked through as we were scanning. Okay? Now, does this get absolutely everything? No, but it sure does get quite a bit and saves a lot of kind of monotonous cleanup. So if I wanted to delete all the marked points, I could simply say delete all my marked, and it goes through and should get rid of all my points here. It didn't look like it did it there, but I may have to run detect again because I ran this earlier today. So let's try one more time. Not doing it. I may have to run it again here, and I'm not going to do that while we're on the call. But you know, when I'm done, I simply turn the filter off and I'm back, and I can get rid of those points. Or those points will be gotten rid of. And so that's just a nice little command to get rid of some moving objects moving through the screen. Okay? So let's go from kind of the review and optimize phase to getting data published out of here. And I'm going to accept this. And we're going to move over to publishing, where I told you I would take a look, and I'm not going to publish out an LGS, but I would click the LGS, and I'm sure they're going to tell it to save, and that's fine. Okay? And now there are some exporting options. So I can tell it to include the point cloud data or include the images, and I can set the image resolution. So if you're not overly concerned about image quality coming into something like CloudWorks, you can kind of dumb this down a bit. Okay? All right, and of course, the password here, where I type in password, and that would allow me to go ahead and export that LGS file with a password. And the same goes here for the Jetstream data. Same idea. So now I'm going to say, look, one last thing down here. I want to be able to export to RCP. So I come out, tell it to save as an RCP. I want to save it to, let's say, my desktop. And I'll then, once this is done, be able to simply insert this into Recap. And I won't have to go through the whole workflow. I'm sure many of you out there have done it before, where you've exported an E57 only to have to go and import that E57 right back into Recap. Okay? Now, it should be noted that in order to do the LGS, the RCP, and import and export those panoramic images, a Publisher Pro license is required. Okay, so if you're wondering, man, why is this grayed out or why is this grayed out, that's the kind of simple reason. Okay. All right, it looks like we're coming up closer to the end. I want to leave some time for some questions here. So I'll stop. Well, I guess I'll leave my screen up just in case a question comes up. But Katana, if you want to open it up for questions, that'd be great.
Yeah, we have a couple of questions right now. One is, what's the latest version of Register 360?
The latest version is 1.6.1.
Perfect. Next, if you rename the setup on the R360 and you export, will that setup you rename carry over to the E57, or will it take the name of the project?
Yes, it will be renamed to the E57 as well, because we've renamed it here. But I think it goes without saying it will not be renamed on the USB stick.
Okay. Next question, is there a way to edit settings for panoramic scan degree in R360? So instead of doing a full 360 degree, you could do a 180 degree.
No, not to my knowledge. And I'll be honest, I don't worry about that because the RTC 360 scans so quickly.
Okay. The final question we have is, how simple is it to clean up bushes, trees, and items not required?
I'm sorry, can you say that one more time?
How simple is it to clean up bushes, trees, or items not required?
Oh, okay. Well, if you're scanning outside, bushes, trees, cars moving through, people moving through, it can be important due to the fact that trees are always moving. And in Register 360, we're using those visual points or those points that we collected as the same to register the data together. So sometimes if I'm scanning outside, I will go and remove some of those trees, especially unwanted wood lines outside my project. I'll remove those to get my registration to be tighter.
Okay, and then we had one more come in. When you use Detect Moving Objects filter, can you deselect some of the data if you want to keep it, or is it all or nothing?
I am fairly certain that it is you have the choice. But let me just make sure on that. Yes, you can go ahead and use the rectangular, circular, or polygonal fence to go ahead and select the marked points. So for instance, if I went in here and used that filter and select, I can't find one of the people now, selected just this person, I can remove just that person.
Wonderful. Well, that's it for questions.
Okay. All right.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. This was recorded, and it'll be posted to our YouTube, and we'll also be able to send you out each a copy. If you do have any questions that come in afterward, feel free to send them over. Thank you so much, and have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.